Shabbat Shalom. So, we talk a lot about the rise of anti-Semitism in American society, which I think is undeniable. Having said that, the 92nd Street Y has every year a State of World Jewry speech, and this year it was given by Bret Stephens, the columnist for the New York Times. And he said that the American Jewish community spends entirely too much money fighting anti-Semitism and not enough money promoting Jewish identity and Jewish involvement, right? And he specifically called for the dismantling of the ADL. He said that, every dollar that we spend on the ADL is a dollar that we don't spend on day schools or Jewish camps or Hillel or our shuls or whatever. And without taking a position on whether the ADL should be dismantled per se, I agree with Stephens. I think we spend too much money and too much psychic energy, emotional energy, because can we solve anti-Semitism? Right? We aren't the ones who are perpetrating anti-Semitism, right? So we are not the ones who can really solve it, right? Any more than black people alone can solve racism, right? Or any group that suffers from oppression. We're not the ones who are perpetrating it. We can't be the ones to solve it. Having said that, one of the things that my Christian minister friends, of whom I have many, will find themselves called on by me is what's known as anti-Judaism. Okay, now what is the difference between anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism? Okay, anti-Judaism is a negative portrayal of the Jewish religion per se, right? Whereas anti-Semitism is more about the Jews as a race, even though we're not a race. And so anti-Judaism, people, particularly Christians, look at Judaism and they say, oh, this is bad, but this is good, right? So they point to something from the Tanakh, which they call the Old Testament, and they contrast it with something from the New Testament, right? And they don't even know that they're doing that, right? Like I've said to Christian friends, who use the term Pharisee as a synonym for hypocrite. All right, the people that you call Pharisees, we call our sages of blessed memory, right? So when you slam the Pharisees, you are slamming the very foundation of Judaism, right? And nothing, I think, is probably more an example of that than the way Christians often look at a phrase from our Parashat this week, ayin tachat ayin, an eye for an eye, right? For example, late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who's somebody who I very much admire, said, that the Old Testament prescription of an eye for an eye leaves everybody blind, right? And he's right, except for the fact that we understand that phrase as never having meant to be applied literally, Okay, first of all, and I say this often, don't argue with me about what the English translation says, right? What does the Hebrew say? And the phrase ayin tachat ayin, and tachat really means in the place of or under. We had that a lot in what I read this morning, right? If you knock out the tooth of your indentured servant, you let him go tachat his tooth, right? So obviously it doesn't mean that you knocked out his tooth so he gets to knock out your tooth, right? You let him go free tachat the tooth, right? So it means substitution or monetary equivalent, right? And here, right, Dr. King was right. If a blind man blinds a sighted man, right, taking the blind man's eye doesn't accomplish anything, right? But on the other hand, if you take the eye of a person who has sight, right, then you've just doubled the blindness, right? There's also a degree of inequality, right? I mean, certain people really depend on their vision for their livelihood, right? And others don't, right? Like I imagine, for example, if you are a physician, if you're a surgeon and you get blinded, pretty hard to practice that specialty, right? On the other hand, if you're a psychiatrist, I mean, I don't know, I know that they like assess your appearance and your gait and so on and so forth, but somebody could probably still function as a psychiatrist if they were blind, right? Hard to function as a surgeon if you're blind. So there's a measure of inequity, and not only that, particularly as the state of medical practice was 3,500 years ago, if we understood it to be literal, so that that the court takes out somebody's eye, it's a very real possibility of death, right? Hemorrhaging, infection, etc., right? In which case, if that happened, would it be an eye for an eye? No, it'd be death for an eye, right? Which again violates the principles of justice. Okay, now, time out because I forgot my water and I'm kind of thirsty. Right, the real significance of this idea of an eye for an eye is proportionality, right? If you look at other ancient Near Eastern law codes, like the Code of Hammurabi, the penalty depended on the social status of the victim and of the culprit, right? So that if a low-class person wounded a noble, the penalty could be death, right? But if a noble wounded a peasant, penalty was just a fine, right? And I spoke about this last night, but in this week's Parsha, for better or for worse, the penalty for murder is the death penalty, right? It's across the board. It's not a fine, right? So the severity of the punishment that you incur depends on the severity of the offense that you commit. And it doesn't matter who's the victim, and it doesn't matter what your social status either, right? Everybody is equal in the eyes of the law. Your value as a person is not based on your social class, not based on your education, it's not based on your race or whatever. It's based on what? That you were created B'Tselem Elohim, right? In the image of God, right? And that is the basis of your value as a person, not anything else. Okay, so if that's the case, if eye for an eye never meant literally poke out the guy's eye or amputate their hand or amputate their leg or whatever, so what is the point or the significance or maybe even the innovation of this law, right? Why do we have it, right? Why do we have it? Yeah, Brian.
I would think that at least putting it that way would be deterrent. And people, well, I don't want to lose my eye, or I don't want to steal, I want to get my hand cut off. If I steal, so maybe I won't steal, so I won't get my hand cut off. So it's kind of the imagery of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the functions is that it emphasizes the seriousness, right? It emphasizes the seriousness, and in a purely theoretical world of equality, you would actually deserve that punishment, right? But it's not something that we like. It's aspirational, right? I mean, like, I have said on occasion that that person should be taken out of the shop, right? Do I mean it? Not well. In the sense of intending to actually do it. No. Right? Do I think maybe in a just world that would happen? Yes. Right? Particularly people who irritate me when I'm driving. Right? People who cut me off, or people who, confuse Montgomery Village Avenue with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, things like that. Like those, in a just world, those people would all be put to death, right? But that's not the world that we live in, right? So, but it's a statement sort of values, right? But it also is actually a limitation on punishment, right? As compared to these other legal codes. That is to say, an eye for an eye, not a life for an eye, right? That there it's a ceiling. It's not a floor. Now, one of the things that in researching this talk this morning, I found fascinating. Okay, I found, because as you probably might recall, in December of 2024, I was walking in a parking lot when I was hit by a car, right? And thank God it was in a parking lot. The car was not going very fast. I was not seriously injured, but I was injured, right? And the insurance company of the guy who hit me, within 4 days of the accident, acknowledged their liability, right? I haven't seen yet a penny, right? Because there's a lot of back and forth between my attorney and the insurance company as to exactly like what my damages are, okay? And one of the things that I learned is that your damages, the payout that you receive, is often a multiple of the actual damages, right? So that, for example, I miss a few days of work because of the accident, and the shul said, we're not gonna dock your pay for missing work because you were hit by a car. They should have docked my pay, because I would have gotten 3 times the amount of pay that I was docked. Okay, that's the way these things are figured out. And since I did not really suffer a lot of economic damage, right? So the insurance company says, we don't want to pay you a lot of money. And my lawyer says, no, right? You should pay him a lot of money, because among other things, he gets a percentage of it, right? So the more I get, the more he gets, right? So, but in the Talmud, for a case of a tort, right, where a person harms another person, there are 5 categories of compensation that the victim is owed. Okay, listen to this. I find it fascinating. Okay, so the first category is nezek, which means permanent disability, right? In other words, what is your loss of future earning potential from this injury, right? Right? That's one of the things that, is still relevant today, right? Loss of future earning. SAR. SAR means pain and suffering, right? You get compensated for pain and suffering in the Talmud and in the state of Maryland, eventually, right? Right? But again, the same category for your pain and suffering, whether that's physical or psychological. Right? And then there's ripui, which means medical bills, right? So again, whatever medical costs you incur, the person who injured you has to pay, right? In the Talmud and today. Shevet, loss of wages, right? The actual loss that you incurred during the recovery period because you couldn't work, right? So the person who injured you has to compensate you for not only the anticipated loss of future income, but your actual loss of past or present income if you couldn't work or can't work because of the injury, right? So 4 categories so far, right? Earning potential, pain and suffering, medical costs, income loss due to the accident, right? In the Talmud and today. But in the Talmud, there's a 5th category, which I have not seen as applied, in American law, boshet, which means loss of dignity, right? If you lost dignity or embarrassment or social stigma because of the injury that you suffered, you would be compensated for that as well. Right? How do you quantify? I don't know. I mean, it's somewhat subjective, right? It's somewhat subjective, and but all of these things are subjective, right? In other words, look, if I am what?
Wages is not subjective. Medical bills are not subjective.
Well, all right, but lots of future earnings is.
That is. Yeah.
Right? But I don't know how you quantify dignity. I don't know how you do that, but presumably there's some way. There's some way to do that, right? But the idea.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
May I suggest maybe it's like if you hurt somebody's face and they sell good with good looks, but they can't work as a person that looks terrible to the customers.
Okay, right. If you cause it, Rabbi Goldman says if you like you cause a disfigurement to somebody, right? But all right, so that could be bullshit, but that also could be nezek, right? I mean, if I don't know, if you're a model, right, and your looks, right, you can't work, is that bullshit or is that nezek? I mean, it could be either one, right? I mean, if you really like you can't work, that's nezek, right? But if maybe you feel like, oh, I look terrible, I don't want anybody to see me, right? That would be maybe bullshit. I don't know. So that is a different category, right? But the idea that we have responsibility, but the responsibility is based in the basic and fundamental equality of people, and that justice isn't found in retribution, but in restoration, right? In other words, right, you hurt, and this is really important because it's a natural thing, right? I mean, I said this in sermons, right? Hurt people, right? Hurt people, right? You caused me to suffer, so I want to cause you to suffer, right? I mean, I've heard from Palestinians that is the logic of terrorism, right? That they understand that terrorism is never going to get rid of the state of Israel, right? But you guys inflict pain on us, so we're going to inflict pain on you so you understand what it feels like. Right? That's the logic, right? And I would speculate that the vast majority of us at some point in our lives have been hurt by another person, and our desire was to hurt them. Right? You hurt me, I want to hurt you. That way everything is fair, right? But that's not justice. Justice is not in retribution, it's in restoration. You cause damage and you repair it, and that, I think, is the idea of an eye for an eye. All right, Shabbat Shalom.